Welcome to VE Day from the Rectory. Victory, a word for today, the 75th anniversary of VE Day. Victory in Europe. It has nothing to do with the Eurovision Song Contest or European football, but everything to do with a great moment in history, the end of the Second World War. Victory, a cry of triumph, a mood of celebration, a time to make a great deal of noise and have fun. Victory, the deadly enemy defeated. On May the 8th, 1945, King George VI, father of our own Queen Elizabeth II, told the British people that the German war was over. In fact, it was not the end of global war, because war continued to be waged by the Japanese Empire, but it was the end of war on European soil. It was a war that had lasted almost 6 years, costing the lives of tens of millions, and a war that had darkened the lives of almost everyone living in these islands. One of the darkest moments for the United Kingdom came in the summer of 1940, when Nazi forces were all set to cross the English Channel and occupy the country. Germany had a vastly superior air force in terms of numbers, and once supremacy in the air could be guaranteed, the Nazi troops were lined up in French ports ready to invade. It was a moment of supreme crisis, and in such a crisis in those days, there was one thing to be done: turn to Almighty God for deliverance from the deadly foe. There was little prospect of victory at the outset of the war. On the 24th of May 1940, King George VI called his people to pray. They did so in huge numbers, lords and ladies, politicians and royals, right down to every section of society. Movie-tone news captured the moment. There on the streets of London and elsewhere, people waited patiently in line in May 1940. Unlike our present crisis with COVID-19, they were not queuing to get into a supermarket, but to get into a church or cathedral. They queued for prayer. In the 5 years that were to follow, the citizens of these islands put up with privations and hardships of all kinds. German U-boats sank as many supply ships as they could, so that food was rationed. British cities were bombed without let-up. One such city was Coventry. It's difficult to appreciate the human suffering by quoting the number of bombs dropped and buildings destroyed. But here is one man's story. On the 17th of October 1940, 2nd Lieutenant Sandy Campbell of the Royal Engineers Bomb Disposal Company was called upon to deal with an unexploded bomb that had fallen at the Triumph Engineering Company's works in Canley. Campbell found that the bomb was fitted with a delayed action fuse that was impossible to remove, so he transported it to a safe place. That was done by lorry, and he lay alongside the bomb so that he could hear it if it started ticking and could warn the driver to stop and run for cover. Having taken it a safe distance, he disposed of the bomb successfully, but was killed whilst dealing with another bomb the next day. Campbell was posthumously awarded a George Cross for his actions. But worse was to come for Coventry. People recall the night of 14th and 15th of November 1940, when the city was bombed with incendiary devices. The medieval cathedral was destroyed, and many civilians lost their lives and their homes. This infamous action became known as the Coventry Blitz. At the start of the war, the British Army was woefully unprepared, and in May and June the British Expeditionary Force was forced into retreat at Dunkirk. German planes and artillery pounded the sand dunes as men waited to be taken off to the ships lying at anchor offshore, and many never made it home. Nazi warplanes machine-gunned the lines of soldiers waiting waist-deep to embark. The sea turned red at Dunkirk. Amazingly, a number did escape to return to Blighty to begin rebuilding a shattered army. Winston Churchill stood up in the Commons on June the 4th, 1940, to make a speech. Part of that speech was this: "Mr. Speaker, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost shall be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." This speech, "We shall fight on the beaches," is now famous, a rallying cry to the people to keep up national morale. It establishes Churchill as a towering leader in a time of the gravest danger. He deserves his place in history, but there were lean years to come for ordinary people. A boy who was 12 years of age in 1939 later recalled life as a teenager in the war years. The streets at night were dark because of the blackout, and gas masks were worn. There were few private cars, as there was no petrol. His schooling consisted of just 2.5 days a week. At home the food was limited. His mother made Walton pie, largely made from vegetables, and pastry made without any fat. He never saw a banana for the whole period of the war. Clothes were often homemade and handed down, and entertainment was provided by the wireless and propaganda films at the cinema. Nights in the Anderson shelter were cold and accompanied by the sound of landmines blowing houses nearby to pieces. Classmates died around him. Despite the bombing and lack of food and clothing, the wartime generation did not complain. The country was fighting against tyranny and evil. It was a morally just cause, and Hitler and his Nazi ideology must be confronted and overcome. Finally, victory was achieved. And on May the 8th, 1945, the crowds gathered in their hundreds of thousands on the Mall in London. Movie Tone records civilians and service personnel, children, women and men, all rushing to the railings of Buckingham Palace. They wanted their leaders. "We want the king! We want the king! We want the king!" they shouted, until their voices were hoarse. George VI sat at a desk in the palace with a BBC microphone in front of him, thin and wearing a dark suit, a man known to have battled with a pronounced stutter so that he might communicate with his people. The words come slowly and hesitantly. At this hour, when the dreadful shadow of war has passed from these islands, today we give thanks to God for a great deliverance. Speaking from our empire's oldest capital city, war-battered but never for one moment daunted or dismayed, Germany, the enemy, who drove all of Europe into war, has been finally overcome. In the Far East we have yet to deal with the Japanese, a determined and cruel foe. But the Queen and I know of the ordeals which you have endured throughout the Commonwealth and Empire. We are proud to have shared some of these ordeals with you. And we know also that together we shall all face the future with a stern resolve. In the hour of danger, we humbly committed our cause into the hand of God, and He has been our strength and shield. Let us thank Him for His mercies, and in this hour of victory commit ourselves and our new task to the guidance of that same strong hand. Worldwide tyranny has been overcome through faith and unity. It is these virtues which have brought about victory. To listen to King George VI today is incredibly moving. These are the words of a leader who has a true heart for his people and a conviction that God has called him for such an hour. It is clear that making such a speech did not come easily to him. The hesitant syntax and slowness of speech make it all the more impressive. Outside, in the streets and in the pubs and dance halls of the wartime capital, people went crazy. Joy was unconfined. Music and dancing continued day and night. Victory, a cry of triumph, a moment of ecstasy. The cup final won, the gold medal achieved, the first-class honours conferred, the world record secured, and in warfare, the enemy defeated. 75 years ago, Europe was no longer subjugated to tyranny, and its peoples were set free, and the sacrifices of the British people have played no small part in achieving a wonderful freedom. It is a long time ago, but we should pause and give thanks for all that was achieved and for our freedom, which today we enjoy. Let us resolve to never forget, and above all to turn to God in our hour of danger. As King George VI said, "He has been our strength and shield." Let us thank him for his mercies, and in this hour commit ourselves to the guidance